For 3 long years, Sarah had made my life miserable with her constant bullying. The weight of it all had finally dragged me down into a deep depression. Just when my brother Mark and my fiancé David were on the verge of sending Sarah to jail for what she had done, a strange thing happened. Sarah suddenly claimed she had been reborn. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to them, her voice trembling as she asked, "Didn't you say that if I repented, you would love me?" That very day, Sarah was released without any charges being filed. Mark and David both urged me to let the whole thing go. "Everyone makes mistakes," they said, trying to reason with me. "No matter what she was like before, she deserves love now." Sarah stood behind them, looking at me with an innocent expression on her face. "Emily," she said softly, "can you forgive me?" Without saying a word, I raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. "Sorry," I said flatly. "I can't forgive you." The day I was finally discharged from the hospital happened to coincide with the day of Sarah's trial. She had tormented me for 3 years, and the emotional toll had led to my depression. My brother Mark and my fiancé David had worked tirelessly to gather enough evidence to bring her to court. When I arrived at the courthouse, I saw Mark and David being interviewed by reporters. "What do you want to say to the abuser?" one of them asked. David's gaze was cold as he looked into the camera. "Since Miss Sarah refuses to admit her guilt, I must seek justice for my fiancé," he stated firmly. A wave of cheers went up around them. My fiancé David was the young CEO of a well-known public company, and my brother Mark was a partner at a prestigious law firm. Everyone believed that Sarah's fate was sealed. Online, the support for me was overwhelming. People commented things like, "Emily is so lucky to have her brother and fiancé standing up for her," and "Most girls who are bullied have to suffer in silence. Stand against school bullying. Go, Emily." My brother Mark stood silently, his cold eyes fixed on a car that was slowly approaching. Inside, I could see Sarah sitting. Before coming to the courthouse, my doctor had advised against me attending the hearing. She explained that recounting the events could trigger my emotions and worsen my depression. So, my friend Jessica had offered to attend on my behalf. I would wait for her in the courthouse lobby. We managed to avoid the reporters at the main entrance and walked into the quiet lobby. There, we unexpectedly came face to face with Sarah. Her once arrogant and beautiful face now looked somewhat fearful. When she saw my brother and David, tears immediately welled up in her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. "Mark, David, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. My brother and David walked past her without even looking her way and headed inside. Jessica patted my shoulder reassuringly before following them. "Don't worry," she said. "The law won't let the guilty go unpunished." The courtroom door closed behind her, and silence enveloped the surroundings. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as I anxiously waited for the final verdict. Finally, at 11 o'clock, Jessica burst out of the courtroom door. Her face was filled with anger. My heart sank as I stood up and asked in a trembling voice, "Jessica, what happened?" Jessica opened her mouth, her expression one of utter disappointment, and began to speak. "Your brother and David, they..." Seeing her distress, I rushed towards the courtroom door. Just around the corner, I saw David and my brother flanking a petite Sarah. They both wore grim expressions as they looked down at her tear-streaked face. Sarah nervously reached out and grabbed my brother's hand. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice wavering. "I know I did a lot of wrong things. I'll do my best to make amends." "Mark, can you forgive me?" This uncharacteristic plea seemed to stiffen my brother's expression. He then coolly pushed her hand away, trying to appear calm. "When you called me disgusting, didn't you think about wanting my forgiveness?" he asked, his voice flat. Ignoring his coldness, Sarah threw herself into his arms. "Mark," she said, her voice soft, "I like you. Let's be together, okay?" I saw my brother's fists clench suddenly, and I also caught a fleeting hint of bitterness in David's eyes. "Brother," I interrupted them, my voice filled with fear and unease as I softly asked, "Did we win today's case?" David gave me a look that conveyed nothing but bad news. "Sarah was acquitted," he said, his words hitting me like a thunderclap, leaving my head spinning. Acquitted? How is that possible? I exclaimed. The judge said our evidence was exaggerated and didn't accept it, David explained. But this evidence was meticulously prepared by you and Mark, I protested, my voice rising. My intense shouting attracted the attention of the reporters outside the door. They quickly surrounded me, their cameras zooming in on my face, which I'm sure showed nothing but dissatisfaction. Questions bombarded me from all directions. Miss Emily, how do you explain the judge's acquittal of Sarah? One reporter shouted. Did you deceive the public? Another one yelled. More and more reporters rushed in, creating a chaotic scene. David quickly pulled me away from the crowd. As we were getting into the car, he accidentally brushed against the scars on my arm, and I winced in pain. Under my thin clothes, the orange peel-like scar stretched along my entire arm. It was horrid and disgusting, a permanent reminder of the day Sarah burned me with a curling iron, all because someone had complimented my skin. My hair was also ruined, looking like dry straw. Sarah had poured chemicals on it because someone had praised my thick, black locks. At that moment, I still held on to some hope in David. David, please, take me back, I pleaded. I want to see the judge. But the next second, my words caught in my throat. David's gentle eyes held a hint of impatience. Emily, don't act like this in front of reporters, he said, his voice low. We're getting married, and I want you to be normal, not someone who always needs me to clean up after them. I stood there, stunned, unable to process what he had just said. It took me a while to react. David, I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Am I being unreasonable? Did I make these scars myself? My hysterical questioning was met with his endless silence. Emily, I have a meeting at the company, he said, his tone dismissive. Stay at your brother's place tonight. That night, videos of my emotional breakdown at the courthouse were widely reported. In the footage, Sarah appeared tearful and pitiful. It's okay, she said, her voice full of false sympathy. Emily is just sick. I don't blame her. The netizens who had originally supported me quickly turned against me. Comments flooded the internet. Wow, turns out Emily made it all up. And since you like to spread falsehoods, you should go to jail. Someone even dug up information about my family. Did you guys know Emily's family is actually rich? They posted. Who would believe a wealthy heiress can be bullied? They didn't know that I was just an adopted daughter. My brother was my parents' biological child. To become a lawyer, he had severed ties with our parents and resolutely took me with him. I hadn't been a spoiled rich girl for a long time. It was late at night, and the bedroom was silent. Jessica had sent me many messages, but I hadn't replied. I was afraid to look at my phone, go online, or turn on the TV. Suddenly, I heard the door open outside, followed by some rustling noises. Then, Sarah's shy voice drifted through the thin walls. Mark, don't turn on the light. I felt like I had fallen into a cold abyss. My brother had brought Sarah home. I opened my bedroom door, and the noises from the living room became more distinct. Be good, sit still, and don't move, I heard my brother's voice, filled with a disturbing command. It was obvious what they were doing. Without hesitation, I turned on the living room light. The sudden, blinding light fell on the couple at the doorway. Sarah screamed and shrank into my brother's arms. My brother frowned and turned around, his irritation visible. Why are you here? He asked, his voice sharp. David wouldn't let me stay at his place, I said, my voice almost numb. Where else could I go? This used to be my sanctuary. I never imagined that one day I wouldn't have a place to stay. Sarah suddenly clung to my brother's chest, looking worried. Mark, don't go near her, she said, her voice laced with fear. You have to remember what I said. Mark patted her hand comfortingly and looked at me with indifference. Emily, he said, David and I have discussed it. You're going back to the hospital. Tomorrow, David's driver will pick you up. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. No reason, he replied curtly. My brother then carried Sarah into his bedroom. As the door gently closed, the living room went dark again. I wanted to follow them and say something, but just as I was about to knock, I overheard noises from inside. Sarah was gasping and crying. Mark, I'm telling the truth, she said, her voice strained. I've been reincarnated, and in the future, Emily will inherit your family's business. I don't care about that business, my brother replied. But what if it's for me? Sarah's voice sounded broken and desperate. What if she will be the death of me? After a long silence, the intimate noises grew louder. Then, my brother's voice followed. Don't worry, I'll protect you. The next day, the driver who came to take me to the hospital found that I was gone. At that moment, I was sitting in our family mansion, having a meal with my parents. Is the online uproar sorted out? My dad asked his secretary nonchalantly. It's been taken care of, the secretary replied. My mom put a piece of beef on my plate. Has Mark not been feeding you all these years? Why have you gotten so skinny? She asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I had ended up at Mark's house many years ago because our parents had taken him to an orphanage for charity work where he had a falling out with them. He declared he would never take over the family business. In his anger, Dad decided to adopt me. You don't want to manage the business? There are others who do, Dad had said. So Mark never liked me. I always walked on eggshells at home, trying to please everyone. Yet when Mark decided to leave home, he took me with him. Our parents didn't stop him. In fact, over the years, the only contact we had was to check how Mark was doing. So, I knew my place in the family dynamic. Facing my mom's concern, I softly defended Mark. Brother was too busy, I said. It's my fault for not eating enough. You're always defending Mark, Mom sighed. Just then, the doorbell rang. The maid opened the door to reveal Mark and David standing on the doorstep. Their sharp, cold stares fell on me as if I were a criminal. Dad frowned. What are you doing here? He asked, his voice stern. Taking Emily away, Mark stated simply. Just minutes ago, I had spilled everything about Mark and Sarah to my parents. I told them that Sarah was her father's illegitimate daughter, always looked down upon, and that her family had been in decline for years. They were of no benefit to Mark's family. Now, Mark was here for me, which only infuriated my parents more. Dad angrily refused him. Emily's not going anywhere, he said firmly. She'll stay till she becomes an adult, then go to college. Dad, Mark pleaded, when you break up with that woman, come back and call me Dad. That summer, protected by my parents, I finally had some peace. The online attacks against me vanished too. Of course, like most cases of campus bullying, the suffering I experienced faded from everyone's memory. Time flew by, and soon it was my coming-of-age ceremony. The place was packed with people. Standing in the crowd, I suddenly heard a clear, carefree voice say, Sarah, who allowed you to be here? I turned to see Olivia, the eldest daughter of Sarah's family, yelling at Sarah. I told you, every time I see you and your mother, I'll slap you. Which face do you want to use this time? It wasn't surprising. Olivia and her illegitimate sister Sarah never got along. Sarah smiled faintly. Mark invited me, she said. Seeing me, she eagerly ran over and took my hand. Emily, where's your brother? I didn't want to deal with her. Sarah gave me a bright smile. Why aren't you talking to me? Your brother and David have forgiven me. Will you forgive me too? Suddenly, I raised my hand and slapped Sarah hard across the face. I'm sorry, I said coldly. I can't forgive you. The sudden slap left Sarah stunned. Only when Mark quickly came over and held her in his arms did she snap out of it. Emily, is this how I raised you? He asked, his voice full of disapproval. Apologize to her. Sarah covered her face, tears streaming down. I'm sorry, Emily, she sobbed. It's all my fault. It is your fault, Mark said, his voice particularly cold. Is depression your shield? Are your minor squabbles worth falling into depression over? So, in his eyes, everything Sarah did to me was just minor squabbles. Sarah hid in his arms, her large tears rolling down her cheeks. Don't, Mark, don't go against her, she pleaded. In the future, she will ruin you. Didn't we agree to meet your parents? Mark finally closed his eyes, seemingly calming his anger. All right, whatever you say, he conceded. After they left, Olivia sauntered over to me. "Better be careful," she said, her tone warning. "If your parents believe her words, they might kick you out." Seeing my questioning look, Olivia scoffed. "Just giving you a heads up. Sarah's been acting crazy lately, saying she has some kind of clairvoyant ability. People who hear her believe it too, like they've been brainwashed. My parents, for example, just recognized her as a daughter and accepted her back into the family." I looked up quietly, staring towards the study. After a moment, the study door opened. Sarah's face was ashen, and she stumbled into the railing. If Mark hadn't caught her, she would have fallen and seriously hurt herself. Guests all turned to look. My dad walked out with lingering anger on his face. He warned her, "Miss Sarah, you're lame. Predictions are useless to me. Our family is not one any random person can enter, and Emily is not someone anyone can bully. I advise you to watch yourself." Olivia snapped her head around to meet my calm gaze. I smiled slightly. "Don't worry, they won't listen to her for now," I said. "Sarah's predictions only work under normal circumstances. So I just need to cut off the path she was talking about." Sarah kept trying to explain. "Uncle, Emily really will covet your inheritance." "Enough," my dad said, his gaze icy. "Emily signed a document to give up her right to inherit long ago for the sake of our relationship with Mark. She's practically cut ties with us." Olivia looked shocked. "Are you crazy? When your parents pass away, if your brother listens to her, she'll ruin you." I stared seriously at Olivia. "Miss Sarah, do you want to make a deal? It will help both you and me." When I finished talking with Olivia and came back, I ran into Mark escorting Sarah home. People around were pointing and gossiping about her. "Isn't that her? Bullies people and tries to break up families too. A bastard child has no class." Sarah was crying pitifully. "Mark, it's not like that. Can you help me sue them, please?" Mark held her hand. "All right, you go home and rest. Things will be better when you wake up." After the coming-of-age ceremony, Olivia found the media for me. I sat in front of the camera, detailing the bullying I had endured from Sarah. The video caused an uproar online. Some sharp-eyed netizens noticed the scars on my body. "Looks like a burn on her body," one commented. I went to the hearing, but Emily's lawyer didn't present evidence. That's when I realized Mark and David had hidden evidence from me without my consent. Netizens demanded I change lawyers and refile the lawsuit. Soon, I found a lawyer willing to help with my case. The day before submitting the materials, I suddenly got a call from David. "Emily, let's pick a date to register our marriage," he said. His tone was so gentle, it sounded fake. I instantly understood his motive. "No matter what you say, I won't clear Sarah's name," I said firmly. "She deserves all the criticism." There was a long silence on the other end. "Emily, this is your last chance," David said, his voice now hard. I angrily hung up, my hands trembling. I dared not gamble on human nature. If my parents saw Sarah's predictions coming true, would they still help me? I was just an adopted daughter. The only way was to appease my parents for now and as quickly as possible bring Sarah to justice. In the following days, things progressed too smoothly. Only when I found myself blocked in a dark alley did I realize what David meant by, "Don't regret it." Several men pressed me down in the alley, ripping my clothes. Sarah stood nearby, gloating. "Emily, you must be wondering why they're doing this to you," she sneered. "Because you deserve it. In the previous life, you harmed us all, yet sat there unperturbed. Why, no matter how many times you win, you'll lose to me in the end." Those men, like wild dogs, pounced as Sarah left. I screamed, fighting back with all my might. As time ticked by, they panicked. "Knock her out first," one of them yelled. I saw a rock being raised high above my head. Then, the sound of sirens echoed from outside the alley. Both police and reporters had arrived. The police had been called by Olivia and the reporters by Sarah. That day, videos of me, disheveled and being dragged out of the alley, were headlined everywhere. Numerous media outlets spread the news. Olivia threw a coat over me and dragged me into a nearby bathroom, gripping my trembling hands. "Emily, open your eyes," she said firmly. "Look at me. They're the ones who deserve to die." "No reconciliation, got it?" Covered in wounds, I numbly held onto Olivia's hands. "Don't let Jessica find out," I whispered. "Jessica will fight for me." "Okay," Olivia replied softly. I was shaking all over. "Also, don't stand up for me," I pleaded. "Why?" Olivia asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "What if Mark and David were involved too?" I trembled in pain. "You mean your parents might let it slide?" Olivia paled. "Yes," I said, slowly hugging my legs. "They value interests above all. They don't care about me." "Impossible!" Olivia exclaimed. Just then, unfamiliar voices came from outside the bathroom. "The girl's parents are here to take her home, saying she's fine. They want to take her back." Another voice added, "The parents of the girl who reported it are here too, apologizing for making a false report." The light in Olivia's eyes dimmed. My parents had given up on me. Sarah had blocked my last escape route. I smiled bitterly. "Olivia, we have to leave to survive," I said. "Next time it might be worse. They might even kill me." In the dim bathroom, the fan hummed. Hate filled Olivia's eyes. "So, what's your plan?" she asked. "Leave," I replied. "I can't promise how long I'll be gone, but believe me, I will come back." That summer, I couldn't attend my dream university. Instead, I boarded a plane to the United States. I was forced into a remote psychiatric hospital by Mark. The day I boarded the plane, Sarah came to see me off. With a smug look on her face, she said, "Emily, go to hell." But Sarah could never imagine that the moment I got on that plane, her life was destined to become a living hell because of me. Winter passed, spring came, and 7 years flew by. The poplars outside the psychiatric hospital began to shed their white fluff again. In the afternoon, I curled up on the bed, staring blankly at the poplars outside. There was a psychological assessment form filled with numbers on the table. Suddenly, the sliding door of the ward was opened and a mocking voice came in. "Miss Emily, how many times have you done the assessment? Can you pass this time?" I turned my head and met Olivia's somewhat haggard face. I smiled and said, "I don't know." A doctor followed behind Olivia. In a calm voice, he told me, "Miss, your condition has improved. You can be discharged now." By then, 7 years had passed since I came in. Olivia stared at the assessment form in my hand. The number at the top right was 2556. "What does this mean?" she asked. "The 2556th time," I replied. Olivia looked at me like I was crazy. "You've been proving you're sane since the day you got here? For 7 years straight?" I laughed. You see, finding the right connections was worth it. Olivia had spent 7 long years finding ways to get me out of the psychiatric hospital. She picked up my luggage and casually said, "By the way, your brother and Sarah are getting married." I paused. I replied. All these years, Sarah couldn't manage the business, and her family relied entirely on Olivia. Meanwhile, Mark's business ventures were failures. As a result, the positions of the two families in the business world had reversed. So, the marriage naturally fell into place. Olivia dug through her bag. "Oh, right, your acceptance letter," she said, handing me an envelope. It was from the renowned physics professor, Mr. Jones. Back then, I had emailed him for half a year without a response. Now, he probably didn't want me to leave. Mr. Jones always said I was the most talented physicist he had ever met. Because of this admiration, he broke the rules and privately taught me physics through emails and videos for 7 years. And the day I left the hospital, he eagerly sent me an acceptance offer. I sent him an email back. "Thank you, but I might need to defer. I have things to do." He replied, "Good luck." I returned to my country as a senior technical advisor for the corporation. Seeing Mark and Sarah's wedding news everywhere made me feel sick. In the afternoon, at the end of a cool hallway, I heard Sarah's arrogant voice. "Picking the time for my wedding shoot to have a meeting? Doesn't Olivia want to work anymore?" Olivia led me to the office door, smiling. "We're here to introduce an old friend," she announced. After 7 years, Sarah had become even more stunning. I heard that over the years the elders favored her, and Sarah had shed her old cautious and disheveled self, becoming the elegant daughter of a prominent family. She didn't recognize me at first and mocked Olivia. You won't stay long, she said, her voice dripping with confidence. Once I'm married, Mark will take over everything. Emily! Mark, who was standing aside, suddenly called my name. There was a visible panic on Sarah's face. Following Mark's gaze, she looked at me. In a sharp tone, she demanded, Emily, how did you come back without my permission? Everyone, from Sarah's fragmented words, realized my identity and started whispering, Is this the disgraced lady? I heard she went insane and was sent abroad for treatment. Olivia must be mad bringing a lunatic at this moment. Over the years, Sarah had spread rumors everywhere that I was humiliated. As a result, many high-status families avoided arranging marriages with me. Gradually, my family saw no value in me and forgot about me. So, Sarah was sure I'd never leave the psychiatric hospital. I smiled at her. Do I need your permission to be discharged? Sarah snapped out of her panic, holding Mark's arm, and provocatively asked, Honey, Emily's still sick. How about we send her back? You don't need to worry about my mental state, I replied calmly. I threw the acceptance letter into Sarah's arms, causing her to stumble. Look at the words on it. Now reconsider your tone and words and think about how to speak to your new boss. The room fell into dead silence. Sarah held the letter with its black words and red seal and suddenly stammered, Impossible! Mark frowned, examining the content. Olivia, she's just a lunatic. Do you think, after this is public, the project will continue? I had to admit, Mark was completely useless in business. I found a soft, comfortable chair and sat, observing the pair with a smile. The AI products our companies recently launched are now widely used in various industries. Are you going to tell the world that the existing products are based on the delusions of a lunatic? Olivia, expressionless, added, Road safety, healthcare, agriculture. Mark, you know if we release that statement, both our families will be doomed. Mark's face darkened. Sarah turned pale, gripping Mark's hand tightly. Over the years, Sarah's life had gotten better and better. Especially after the corporation became prominent, she and Mark indulged in luxury every day. They became the golden couple envied by everyone. But Sarah didn't know this was the mirage, the dreamland Olivia and I had created for her. All her glamour was propped up by me, just waiting for this day to pull the rug out from under her. Sarah and Mark would fall from the clouds hard. They'd be shattered completely. And this was just the beginning. I stood up. All right, since neither of you intends to spread more rumors, let's meet in the conference room in 10 minutes. By the end of the meeting, Olivia's face almost cracked from smiling. After years of lying low, Olivia finally held a successful shareholders meeting today and kicked her father off that position. That night, I drove to Mark's home. Dad, Mom, Mark, and Sarah were all sitting neatly in the dining room, but the atmosphere was a bit awkward. Mom grabbed Dad's hand tightly, her smile a bit forced. Emily, why are you back? She asked. I smiled, bringing in gifts. Of course, I missed you all, I replied sweetly. Then, amid the silence, I casually asked, So, where am I staying tonight? Sarah looked at Mark for help, shaking her head in fear. Mark frowned. You came back unannounced and expect us to have a room for you? He asked, his tone unwelcoming. Then I'll just share a room with my sister-in-law, I said with a smile, looking directly at Sarah. Dad stood up suddenly. Emily, come with me to the study, he said, his voice firm. The study was quiet. Since coming in, Dad hadn't said a word. It seemed like he was waiting for me to speak first. I calmly asked, Dad, did you need something from me? Dad sighed deeply, speaking with a heavy heart. Over the years, our family has indeed let you down, he said, his voice filled with regret. Now that you're back, your mom and I will treat you as our own daughter. Just don't hold any grudge against your brother and Sarah. Hearing this, I didn't feel sad at all. To be more precise, during countless nights over the past 7 years when I curled up in bed crying, I had already gotten used to not feeling sad. I placed the gift in front of Dad, saying, Dad, I think there's something you need to understand. A prophecy is called a prophecy because it's inevitable. You have to choose the company or Mark. His face turned pale quickly. I got up and said, Take your time, think it over. Let me know whenever you're ready. I began enjoying the most comfortable days of my life. I coordinated with the tech department and regularly updated Mr. Jones on the project progress. Olivia's parents didn't dare make a peep. Under such circumstances, it was Sarah who broke down first. During a morning meeting, she lost her temper in front of everyone. "Emily, could you stop targeting me?" she yelled, flinging the proposal papers everywhere, crying and shouting, "This is workplace bullying." I avoided the flying folders and quietly waited for her to finish her outburst. Then, I called security. "Take a break," I instructed them calmly. "Come back when you can tell the difference between targeting and normal work demands." Others in the meeting room looked at Sarah oddly. Sarah tried to rally them to her side. "She treats me like this. She'll treat you the same way someday." But no one was willing to speak up for her. She didn't understand. This was no longer her spoiled brat era. Adults wouldn't let rumors affect their instinct for workplace survival. Whoever pays them is the boss. Mr. Jones and the company's new project were steadily progressing. One evening, as I left the office building, I saw a familiar face. David. Olivia had told me that since finding out about Mark and Sarah's wedding, David had been drinking himself into a stupor, almost ruining his family business. So there was no need for us to act against him. Today, however, he was again polished, standing in front of me with the same tenderness as before. "Emily, you're back," he said softly. "I missed you so much." Indeed, for Sarah, he matched the image of a deeply affectionate, supporting male perfectly. Handsome, loyal, gentle. Someone who'd give up everything for his love, including forcing himself to marry me for Sarah, ruining his own happiness. I sneered lightly. "David, have you kicked the drinking habit?" I asked. David's expression stiffened. "Emily, I've waited for you for many years," he said, his voice earnest. He was dressed up today, smelling of fresh soap, because I had once said I liked his scent. I tossed my bag to him, smiling. "David, I want French cuisine tonight," I said. "Sure," he replied readily. Entering the restaurant, I intentionally mentioned to the waiter that David and I were an engaged couple. The restaurant thoughtfully arranged some romantic touches for us. All evening, I rested my head on my hand, enjoying the piano and violin duet. I finished all the meat on my plate and even ordered an extra cream of mushroom soup. David seemed utterly distracted. Every moment appeared to be an endurance test for him. I pretended not to notice until a certain moment when I touched David's hand. When he pulled away like lightning, showing disgust in his eyes, I finally laughed out loud, genuinely pleased. Tossing my fork aside, I propped my chin with interest. "Tired of pretending?" I asked. David avoided my gaze. "Emily, do you still like me?" he asked, his voice low. I smiled sweetly. "Of course," I replied. "When should we get married?" David's lips tightened. "Whenever you want," he mumbled. The look of humiliation on his face was truly amusing. For days, David was at my beck and call, until one day I once again gave Sarah a hard time at the company. David caught me during lunch. "Emily, can you stop picking on Sarah?" he pleaded. "We were just kids back then. No need to hold on to it." I looked at him quietly, rolling up my sleeves to reveal the scars on my arm. "If these scars were on Sarah, would you still think it was just kids' stuff?" I asked. When David didn't respond, I grabbed my bag. "Let it go for today. I'm heading home," I said. David grabbed my arm, his voice stern. "Emily, can you stop having tantrums?" I halted. "Sorry, are you criticizing me?" I asked, feigning surprise. "What?" David stammered. I pushed David's hand away, feeling amused. "You seem confused about your position," I said. "Is this relationship something I begged for?" David's expression hardened. "What do you mean?" he asked. Seeing Sarah's lapdog come to grovel at me was pretty interesting. I pinched his face gently. "Considering your looks, I gave you a chance to accompany me for a few days," I said. "Did you really think I'd marry you?" David's pupils constricted. "You were playing me?" he asked, his voice incredulous. "A clueless lackey, expecting to be treated like a person?" I opened the car door, waving at David. "Thanks for the fun," I said, "but it's over now." Hearing this story, Olivia was laughing so hard she was crying. "Living off a woman and acting tough, huh? David is something else. I'd kneel to you if it were me." Just then, Some ambiguous sounds came from the computer. Olivia gestured for a silence. Huh? This is my study, right? What are Sarah and David doing in there? We saw Sarah being held on the desk by David. It goes without saying, David was asking, Sarah, can you help me one more time, please? Like 7 years ago, destroy her. David's voice was husky. But those people, they were Mark's doing. You don't want him to do it, right? Sarah's voice suddenly grew louder, filled with desperation. David, even after the marriage, I can still... All right, I'll help you, David interrupted. Olivia turned off the video with a disgusted look on her face. She laughed coldly. Tell me, how can a nobody like David destroy you? Of course, by using his worthless life to trade for mine. Olivia opened her mouth, shaking her head. What an idiot. Made me laugh. The day of Mark's wedding arrived quickly. A lot of people had shown up. When I arrived, Olivia was already sitting in the corner waiting for me. Just as I was about to sit down, Sarah appeared out of nowhere and grabbed my hand. Emily, I need to talk to you, she said, her gaze surprisingly sincere. Can you come with me? Facing her earnest expression, I smiled slightly. Sure, I replied. Sarah led me through the crowd of guests to the back door. Sunlight scattered freely on the asphalt road. It was so quiet that you could only hear the rustling of leaves. A Maserati was parked by the roadside. I stood by the road and said, Say it, what's up? Sarah's face suddenly twisted, her eyes filled with malice. Emily, go to hell, she hissed, and then shoved me hard. In the next second, Sarah's smile froze. She saw her belt tightly gripped by my hand. I rolled with her into the middle of the road. The roaring sound of an engine came from a distance. I saw a speeding car with David behind the wheel. Sarah screamed and struggled. You're crazy, she yelled. The car was almost upon us. The smell of dirt mixed with the rush of excitement in my heart. I pinned Sarah to the ground, smiling. If you want me dead so bad, how about we die together? Actually, the plan Olivia and I had was different, but years of grievances triggered the violence in my heart. For a moment, I genuinely wanted Sarah dead. Sarah's pupils dilated in fear. No, Emily, I beg you, let me go, she cried. Dying hurts too much. The screeching brakes pierced the air, startling a flock of birds nearby. The front bumper of the car stopped just against Sarah's arm. Her skirt was soaking wet. She had peed herself without even realizing it. She was in shock until David rushed down and picked her up off the ground, still dazed. Emily, you're a lunatic. David's voice was dripping with undisguised disgust. I stood by the roadside, slowly wiping my hands with a wet wipe, and played the recording of their conspiracy. Sarah, you have a choice, I said, my voice calm. Either go to jail with David or pin the blame all on him. Rage flashed across David's face. Enough, Emily, he yelled. If you have a problem, come at me. Don't make it hard for her. Suddenly, Sarah shoved David away and crawled towards the approaching police officers. It's David. He tried to kill us. Help! Help! David's words got stuck in his throat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. I clapped my hands and laughed. Brother David, I said, my voice mocking. She doesn't seem to care about you at all. David's face turned pale as he was escorted away by the police on either side. David, you're under arrest for attempted murder, one of the officers stated. David's confused eyes suddenly cleared. This is just a traffic accident. How is this attempted murder? Where's the evidence? He demanded. Do you think we would arrest you without evidence? The policeman retorted. Hearing this, David trembled and looked at me sharply. By this time, I had already walked under a nearby tree and opened my sunshade. Oh, I forgot to mention, I said sweetly. The recording has been given to the police, and the video of you and Sarah's affair is probably playing on the big screen right now. Sarah was completely dumbfounded, sitting on the ground and muttering, Emily, you broke your promise. She got up and ran towards the hall. Just as she ran into Olivia, who had opened the door, Olivia raised her hand and slapped her hard across the face. In front of all the guests, she coldly said, You have brought nothing but disgrace to our family. Sarah saw Mark standing in the distance, behind whom the video was playing loudly. She let out a piercing scream and fainted. The office was peaceful and warm in the afternoon. Olivia entered through the door, plopping down in the boss's chair in front of me, full of energy. I recently got a crazy sister, she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. She's locked in her room every day, babbling nonsense. Now that the toxic Sarah was gone, Olivia had become the true head of the group. She threw the share transfer agreement at me. Time to fulfill your promise, she said. When do I deal with your brother? Whenever, I replied. With the alliance between the two families broken, destroying Mark's family would be a piece of cake. Adding that David was in prison, jealous of the love Mark got from Sarah, he would stop at nothing to spill Mark's secrets. A week later, the group suddenly announced the end of the collaboration with Mark's family and poached the core team following up on the project. As a technical consultant, I went to connect with the team and ran into the enraged Mark. He broke through the police restraint and charged at me, grabbing my neck tightly. Sarah was right, he choked out. You are a curse. The feeling of suffocation washed over me, but I looked at Mark with a smile. No brother in the world would hire someone to humiliate his own sister, I said calmly. You deserve to die. 7 years later, thinking of my fragile and helpless self like a stray dog, I couldn't help tearing up. If it hadn't been for Mark's involvement, my parents wouldn't have stepped in to cover it up. Mark's gaze darkened. So what if I did it? You're just an adopted daughter, he sneered. My fingernails dug deeply into Mark's hand. Guess what? I said, my voice low. When the house collapses, will mom and dad keep a useful adopted daughter or a useless biological son? In 7 years, I had grown strong, holding the core technology of the group, no longer the weak girl I once was. Mark's hand trembled and he let go of me. I clutched my neck, which was red from being choked, and watched the police lead a frantic Mark away. Tears of laughter filled my eyes. It was only now that he realized that these police officers were called by his own parents. They had personally sent their son to jail. Watching Mark being taken away, they cautiously asked me, Emily, you said you'd save the company and wouldn't break your promise, right? Olivia pushed through the crowd and helped me up, placing a cool salve on my neck. Your neck's all red. Let's go to the hospital, she said, her voice full of concern. Olivia pulled me away from the company. It was midsummer, and the dense, leafy paths rustled in the wind. We sat by a flower bed on the roadside, each sucking on a popsicle, not saying a word. Olivia licked her ice pop and said, In a few days, I'll publicly release the details about how Sarah bullied you and had people humiliate you. Emily, the power of the internet 7 years later is much greater than we could have imagined. They'll never recover from it. But then, Olivia looked at me with concern. I'm worried that the rumors and gossip will hurt you. I smiled. What rumors? I asked. Saying I'm dirty and that no one will marry me? Or that I'm weak and unlikable and it must be my fault? Olivia was taken aback but then burst out laughing. Seems like it doesn't bother you at all, she said, shaking her head. I picked up a small stick and drew a circle on the ground. I hope that everyone who has been bullied can stand up and rise above the labels. That's why I'm going public, Olivia. Olivia pondered for a while, then grinned at me. Let's hold a press conference then, she suggested. 3 days later, a grand press conference was held at the company. Olivia and I sat side by side on the stage. We laid out everything that had happened back then, igniting the internet. Wow, I remember Emily. She's the girl whose accusation of being bullied had a twist, one comment read. So it wasn't a false accusation. Her brother and fiancé hid the evidence. Damn them, another exclaimed. Her brother even arranged to have her humiliated. How could they do this to their adopted daughter? Was she really humiliated? Someone else wondered. Whether she was humiliated or not doesn't matter. Our job is to make those bastards pay. 7 years later, the power of the internet was immense. The press conference site was packed with people. Reporters aimed their cameras at me. Emily, how did you turn things around after the injustices you faced as a child? One reporter asked. I glanced at Olivia, smiling. Olivia and I made a deal, tying our fates together, I explained. What deal? Another reporter inquired. No matter what danger I faced in Mark's house, she had to save me no matter what and ensure I survived. In return, I'd help her get everything she wanted. That deal was struck on the night of that dreadful coming-of-age ceremony, as a starved me and a disgruntled Olivia agreed to it. A reporter sighed. Did you ever think, if something went wrong? If anything went wrong, both of us would lose everything, I finished. That's why both of us had to fight desperately to win. I looked towards the corner where Jessica, now the executive director of the company, stood. I gave her a slight smile. I should publicly thank someone, I said. After I'd left, Jessica became Sarah's best friend. Many pieces of evidence were gathered by her in secret to help me. To this day, not many people know much about Jessica. She, unlike Olivia, lacked a strong background. Just as I stayed away from her back then, I wanted to protect her now. Halfway through the press conference, the classic question finally came up. Emily, have you considered marriage? Do those past events affect your marriage prospects? The room gradually quieted down. Many eyes were on me, some scrutinizing, some mocking, some full of expectation. Previously, there were those who publicly stated online, I admit Emily is excellent, but no one would want to marry her. Yeah, she doesn't seem clean. I smiled and gripped the microphone, stepping closer to the camera, and said, I will not be anyone's wife. I am the current chairman of the company, the founder of the Eco Artificial Intelligence Series brand, a company partner and senior technical advisor, and the developer of the Eco brand phones, cars, computers, smart homes, and autonomous driving systems you use. Of course, I pointed at the reporter's camera. Your device too is my creation. Are you sure you want to spend your precious time probing into my personal life rather than providing product feedback and suggestions? The room erupted in thunderous applause. The reporter's face was flushed, and he gave me an apologetic look. I smiled and said, I am Emily. Thank you for your support. Time moved into the scorching month of July. Olivia and my names were plastered all over major financial newspapers and news reports. Interviews kept coming. Before heading to the U.S. for further studies, Olivia held a farewell party for me. She wore loose tank tops and baggy shorts, guzzling half a bottle of beer. Gloating, she said, Mark and David got sentenced. I hired the best lawyer to keep them locked up till they're old men, with no job, no family, and unable to use your AI. Just imagining it feels great. Sarah, though, Olivia frowned. She got a lighter sentence as an abettor, and she keeps acting crazy, like she has a mental illness. Mental illness? I asked, surprised. Yeah, she keeps saying, this isn't the last time. Thinking of the time long ago when Sarah spoke of her rebirth, I decided to see her once. Through a glass wall, I saw Sarah. She looked haggard with deep-set eyes, but her eyes were shining darkly with a hint of madness. She was leaning against the window glass, staring at me with wide eyes. Emily, you think you've won? You won't. I've remembered. You can't leave the country. I've noted it all down. I gazed at her quietly. How many times have you been reborn? I asked. Sarah said smugly, Guess, Emily, you'd be scared to death. Every time I'll block your new path until you have nowhere to go. So you've already lost to me many times. Sarah's face tensed up, gradually turning ferocious. You're lying. I haven't lost. The system tells me I'm the protagonist. It's just a game. Losing 10 or 8 rounds, that's normal. I understood why Olivia said she was insane. She tore at her hair, glaring at me maliciously, looking like a lunatic. Emily, I originally planned to gather information for a few more years, but I can't wait. Every time I see your face, I just want to kill you immediately. The prison guard came over and dragged Sarah away. Sarah screamed loudly, Emily, sleep well. After tonight, you'll return to 7 years ago. This time, I won't let you go. After saying that, she broke free from the guard and slammed her head against the wall. In an instant, blood spurted out, splashing onto the glass. Sarah's body slumped in the corner, eyes wide open. She was dead. Before dying, her eyes were staring at me fiercely. Suddenly, an ancient and mysterious language echoed in my mind. I guessed it might be Sarah's so-called system. Watching them carry Sarah's body away, I turned and walked out. The scorching sunlight fell on me, but I felt no warmth. Olivia came over. "What's wrong? You look like you smelled something bad," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. I took a deep breath. "Nothing," I replied. "I just don't like restarting games, especially when I lose my memory." "Huh?" Olivia looked confused. I patted Olivia's head. "Nothing," I repeated. "Just hoping to get lucky and meet you in the next round." I tried to recite the ancient phrase and recorded it, asking Olivia to find an expert to translate it. Then, I boarded the plane. As we crossed the twilight zone, I closed my eyes calmly, quietly waiting for my destiny. Darkness rushed in, and as if orchestrated, I fell asleep. It felt like a century passed when someone shook me awake. "Ma'am, excuse me," a voice said gently. Amid the bustling noise, I slowly opened my eyes. Outside the plane window was a vast runway. I looked at the flight attendant without a word. She gave me a sweet smile. "It's time to disembark," she announced. My phone chimed with a message from Olivia. It was the translation of the ancient phrase, "Suicide equals voluntary game forfeiture. Host termination successful. Strategy aborted." I got up and walked out. The winding glass corridor stretched ahead. The distant blue sky was clear. The afternoon's scorching sunlight was refracted by the transparent glass, casting a thin layer of shadow. In an instant, a warmth surged through my body. I smiled, basking in the sunlight, stepping forward towards the distance, like a resilient blade of grass, thriving towards the sun.